Her father woke up just before sunrise. He glanced through the cabin. Outside on the private balcony, he could see his 23-year-old daughter resting on a lounge chair. Everything looked normal. He closed his eyes and went back to sleep. About 30 minutes later, he woke again. The chair was empty. Her sandals were still there. Her passport was inside the cabin. Her luggage hadn't been touched. But Amy Lynn Bradley had vanished. How does someone disappear from a cruise ship carrying more than 2,000 passengers? Did she accidentally fall into the Caribbean Sea? Did someone lure her away? Or did she leave the ship alive? Nearly 3 decades later, no one has been able to answer those questions. This is the disappearance of Amy Lynn Bradley. Amy had every reason to be excited about life. She had recently graduated from Longwood University in Virginia. Friends described her as confident, athletic, and fiercely independent. She loved basketball, enjoyed meeting new people, and had recently started planning the next chapter of her future. To celebrate her graduation, Amy joined her parents, Ron and Iva Bradley, and her younger brother Brad, on a Royal Caribbean cruise aboard the Rhapsody of the Seas. The trip began in San Juan, Puerto Rico, on March 21. For 3 days, everything went exactly as planned. The family explored the ship together. They ate in the restaurants, relaxed by the pool, took photographs, laughed. Nothing suggested they were about to become part of one of America's most enduring missing person investigations. On the evening of March 23, the ship departed Aruba and began sailing toward Curaçao. Passengers filled the decks. Live music echoed through the atrium. The casino stayed busy well into the night. For everyone on board, it was another evening of celebration. Amy and her brother Brad decided to spend the night at the ship's nightclub. A live band called Blue Orchid entertained the crowd as passengers danced until the early hours of the morning. Several people later remembered seeing Amy smiling and enjoying herself. At one point, she danced with one of the band's members, Alistair Douglas, known by the nickname Yellow. Years later, that brief interaction would become one of the most discussed moments in the investigation, although no evidence has ever connected Douglas to Amy's disappearance. Around 3:35 a.m., electronic keycard records showed Brad returning to the family's cabin. A few minutes later, Amy arrived. The siblings weren't ready to sleep. Instead, they stepped onto the balcony overlooking the dark Caribbean Sea. The ship moved steadily through calm water. There were no crowds, no music, only the sound of waves breaking against the hull. They talked about the vacation, smoked a cigarette, looked out across the ocean. It was an ordinary conversation between a brother and sister. Neither of them knew it would be their last. After about half an hour, Brad became tired. He wished Amy good night and went inside. Amy remained outside on the balcony. According to her family, that wasn't unusual. She often enjoyed sitting quietly by herself. Inside the cabin, Ron and Iva slept. Outside, Amy watched the sea as the ship continued toward Curaçao. At approximately 5:30 that morning, Ron Bradley woke briefly. He looked toward the balcony. Amy's legs were visible on the lounge chair. Believing she had fallen asleep outside, he decided not to disturb her. He lay back down. 30 minutes later, everything had changed. Ron opened his eyes again and instinctively looked toward the balcony. The chair was empty. At first, he assumed Amy had gone to get coffee or take an early morning walk before the ship reached port. But as he looked around the cabin, something didn't make sense. Her sandals were still on the floor. Her yellow polo shirt remained inside. Her passport was untouched. Her purse was still there. Only her cigarettes and lighter were missing. Ron stepped into the hallway and began searching nearby decks. He checked common areas, looked through lounges, walked past restaurants preparing breakfast. Every corner he turned brought the same result. Amy wasn't there. He hurried back to the cabin and woke his wife. Then Brad. 3 words changed the course of their lives forever. Amy's missing. Within minutes, the Bradley family notified the ship's crew. At that exact moment, the Rhapsody of the Seas was preparing to dock in Curaçao. Thousands of passengers were getting ready to leave the ship. Ron Bradley pleaded with crew members to stop anyone from disembarking until his daughter could be found. He feared that if Amy had been taken off the ship, Every passing minute reduced the chances of finding her. According to the Bradley family, they repeatedly asked for an immediate ship-wide announcement and a full lockdown before passengers left. Royal Caribbean has disputed aspects of that account, and the exact timeline of the initial response remains contested. What is certain is this: by the time searches intensified, many passengers had already entered Curaçao. If Amy had still been somewhere on board, investigators were racing against time. If she had already left the ship, the search had become far more complicated. And within the next few hours, investigators would discover something that made the mystery even more difficult to explain. The first instinct was simple. Amy had to be somewhere on the ship. Ron, Iva, and Brad split up without saying much to each other. There wasn't time. Every minute that passed made finding Amy more difficult. Ron searched the upper decks. He checked the swimming pools, the buffet, the lounges. He stopped passengers and crew members, showing them Amy's photograph and asking the same question over and over. "Have you seen my daughter?" The answer was always the same: no. Brad hurried back to the nightclub where he and Amy had spent the previous evening. The music was gone. The dance floor was empty. Employees were cleaning tables and stacking chairs. Only a few hours earlier, the room had been packed with people. Now it was almost silent. Brad asked everyone he could find if they remembered seeing Amy after he left. Some remembered seeing her dancing. Others remembered speaking with her briefly. But no one could say where she went after the nightclub closed. Meanwhile, crew members began searching cabins, stairwells, storage rooms, restaurants, and public spaces. The Rhapsody of the Seas was enormous. With hundreds of cabins spread across multiple decks, finding one missing passenger was far more difficult than it sounded. As investigators searched the Bradley family's cabin, several details immediately stood out. Amy's passport was still there. Her wallet had been left behind. Most of her clothing remained unpacked. She hadn't packed a bag. She hadn't written a note. Nothing suggested she had planned to leave the ship voluntarily. For her family, that possibility made no sense. Amy was close to them. She had recently graduated. She had plans waiting for her back home in Virginia. Walking away without contacting anyone was completely out of character. As passengers stepped onto the docks in Curaçao, Ron watched helplessly. Every woman with similar hair made him stop. Every crowd looked like another chance to find Amy. He couldn't shake one terrifying thought. If someone had taken her off the ship, they now had a massive head start. Local authorities in Curaçao were quickly notified. Police boarded the ship. Search teams examined passenger areas. Divers searched the water near the dock. Helicopters scanned sections of the surrounding sea. Nothing. No body. No clothing. No sign that Amy had entered the water. Investigators now faced a difficult reality. There was no confirmed crime scene, no physical evidence, and no eyewitness who could account for Amy's movements after her father last saw her on the balcony. That 30-minute window became the most important period in the entire investigation. Somewhere between approximately 5:30 and 6 that morning, Amy disappeared. Investigators began reconstructing her final known hours. Passenger interviews confirmed that Amy had spent much of the night in the nightclub. Several witnesses remembered seeing her dancing with members of the ship's band. One musician immediately attracted attention: Alistair Douglas, better known as Yellow. Passengers recalled seeing Amy talking and dancing with him shortly before she returned to her cabin. Investigators interviewed Douglas as part of the inquiry. He denied having anything to do with Amy's disappearance. Despite years of speculation, authorities have never publicly identified evidence linking him to the case. As detectives continued interviewing passengers, another statement caught their attention. One passenger claimed he believed he had seen Amy near one of the ship's elevators shortly before sunrise. If the sighting was accurate, it would mean Amy had left the balcony alive after her father last saw her. But investigators couldn't verify the account. No photographs, no surveillance footage, no second witness. Just another unanswered question. With so little evidence, investigators began examining every possible explanation. The first theory was an accidental fall. Cruise ships are surrounded by open water. Falls overboard, while rare, have happened before. Could Amy have leaned too far over the balcony, lost her balance, or slipped while walking around the deck? Her family struggled to accept that explanation. Amy was an experienced swimmer. She had grown up around water. No one reported hearing a scream. No passengers recalled seeing anyone fall. No body was recovered despite search efforts. Then investigators considered another possibility. Could Amy have taken her own life? Again, her family strongly disagreed. Friends described her as optimistic and excited about the future. She had recently completed college. She had accepted a new job. Nothing in her recent life suggested she intended to disappear forever. As those possibilities weakened, another question slowly gained momentum. What if Amy never entered the water at all? What if she reached Curacao alive? At first, the idea sounded almost impossible. Cruise ships have security checkpoints. Passengers don't simply vanish unnoticed, but investigators couldn't rule it out. Thousands of passengers had disembarked that morning. Dock workers moved freely between the ship and the port. Supplies were being loaded. Luggage was being unloaded. The harbor was busy. If Amy had been persuaded or forced to leave the ship during that confusion, proving exactly how it happened would be extraordinarily difficult. Days turned into weeks. The investigation slowed. Leads became scarce. Then something unexpected happened. The Bradley family began receiving reports from people who believed they had seen Amy after the ship reached Curacao. At first, there was only one report. Then another. Then another. Some came from tourists. Others came from local residents. Each witness believed they had encountered the missing young woman. Each account sounded convincing, and every single one ended the same way. There wasn't enough evidence to prove it, but one witness would describe details so specific that investigators could not ignore what he had to say. There was no crime scene, no confirmed suspect, no physical evidence, no verified communication from Amy. For most missing person cases, this is where public attention begins to disappear. But for the Bradley family, the mystery was only becoming more complicated. Just weeks after Amy vanished, Ron Bradley and his son Brad returned to Curacao. They couldn't sit at home waiting for answers. If Amy was somewhere on the island, they wanted to find her themselves. Every morning they walked through busy streets carrying stacks of missing person flyers. They visited hotels, restaurants, taxi stands, shops, marinas. They spoke with anyone willing to stop for a few minutes. Most people politely shook their heads. Some accepted a flyer and wished them luck. Then one conversation changed everything. A local taxi driver studied Amy's photograph for several seconds. Then he looked back at Ron. "I think I've seen her." According to the driver, on the morning the cruise ship arrived, he had noticed a young woman who looked remarkably like Amy. She appeared frightened. She seemed to be in a hurry. The driver said she asked where she could find a telephone. Before he could help further, she disappeared into a crowd. The account couldn't be verified, but it became one of the earliest reported sightings after Amy vanished. For Ron Bradley, it was enough to keep hope alive. If the driver had truly seen Amy, then she hadn't disappeared into the ocean. She had reached land. Not long after, another unsettling moment unfolded. Brad Bradley was walking through Curacao, continuing the search. As people moved around him, he suddenly heard someone call his name. "Brad." He stopped immediately. The voice sounded familiar, painfully familiar. He later said it sounded exactly like Amy. He turned and spotted a van pulling away. Without thinking, he ran after it. The van disappeared into traffic. Brad never caught up. He has always admitted he cannot prove what happened that day. But he has also said he has never forgotten that voice. As the months passed, the Bradley family refused to stop searching. Then, in August 1998, another witness came forward. His name was David Carmichael, a Canadian engineer who had been vacationing in Curacao. Carmichael said he was walking near Playa Porto Mari after a morning of scuba diving when he noticed a young woman standing with two men. At first, nothing caught his attention. Then he noticed the tattoos. One tattoo showed the Tasmanian devil spinning a basketball. Another was a small gecko near her navel. Those details immediately stood out because they matched Amy Bradley's distinctive tattoos. According to Carmichael, the woman looked directly at him several times. When she realized he was speaking English, her expression changed. He believed she wanted to approach him. Before she could move, one of the men stepped between them. The man watched Carmichael closely. Then he gestured for the woman to leave. Within seconds, all three disappeared. At the time, Carmichael had no idea Amy Bradley was missing. Months later, while watching television, he saw Amy's photograph. He said he recognized her instantly. He contacted investigators and later met the Bradley family in person to describe exactly what he had seen. The FBI examined his statement. Despite interviewing witnesses and reviewing available information, agents were unable to confirm that the woman was Amy. Still, the report carried unusual weight, not because it solved the case, but because Carmichael accurately described tattoos that were not widely known to the public at the time. For Ron and Iva Bradley, it was another reason to believe their daughter might still be alive. Then came perhaps the most disturbing account in the entire investigation. U.S. Navy Petty Officer William Hefner was visiting Curacao. According to Hefner, he entered a local brothel. Inside, a woman quietly approached him. She spoke softly, making sure no one else could hear. Then she said something he would never forget. "My name is Amy Bradley." Hefner later told investigators that the woman appeared frightened. She claimed she was being held against her will. According to his account, she told him she had been taken from a cruise ship and was unable to escape the people controlling her. Hefner said he wanted to help immediately, but he was alone. He feared that confronting several men inside the building could put both of them in danger. He left the brothel without alerting local authorities. Years later, after retiring from the Navy, Hefner saw Amy's story in the media. He immediately contacted investigators. The FBI investigated the report. By that time, the brothel had burned down. No records remained. No employees could be located. And the woman Hefner described was never identified. Once again, the lead ended where so many others had ended, without proof. For the Bradley family, every reported sighting created the same emotional cycle: hope, anticipation, then heartbreak. Imagine hearing that your missing daughter may still be alive, only to discover that every lead ends just one step short of an answer. As the years passed, Amy's photograph appeared on television programs, newspaper front pages, and missing person campaigns across the United States. The FBI continued investigating. Tips arrived from different countries. Some were quickly ruled out. Others took months to examine. Then, several years later, the case took another unexpected turn. Anonymous photographs appeared online. The woman in those images looked remarkably like Amy Bradley. No one knew who uploaded them. No one knew where they had been taken. But for the Bradley family, those photographs reopened a question they had never stopped asking. Was Amy still alive? Or were they chasing another heartbreaking illusion? In 2005, more than 7 years after Amy Bradley disappeared, an anonymous email arrived in the Bradley family's inbox. Attached were several photographs of a woman. The sender claimed the images had been found on an escort website operating somewhere in the Caribbean. The woman called herself Jazz. The sender believed she was Amy Bradley. When Ron and Iva opened the photographs, they froze. The resemblance was remarkable. The woman's facial structure, her smile, her eyes. Even after years had passed, they believed they were looking at their daughter. The photographs were immediately handed over to the FBI. Investigators worked to identify where the images had been taken, who had uploaded them, and whether the woman could truly be Amy. Despite extensive efforts, the investigation reached another dead end. Authorities were unable to verify the identity of the woman. They could not determine where the photographs had originated, and they could not prove or disprove that the woman was Amy Bradley. Once again, hope collided with uncertainty. For the Bradley family, life became a cycle of unanswered phone calls, unexpected tips, and emotional highs followed by devastating disappointment. Every time the phone rang, they wondered if this would finally be the call. Every email, every letter, every reported sighting carried the possibility that their daughter had finally been found. Most ended exactly the same way. without answers. As the years passed, investigators continued reviewing evidence. The FBI never closed Amy's case. Instead, they continued appealing to the public for information. Age-progressed images were released, showing what Amy might look like years after her disappearance. Today, the FBI still offers a reward of up to $100,000 for information leading to Amy's recovery or to the arrest and conviction of anyone responsible for her disappearance. More than 27 years have passed, yet the investigation remains active. Over the years, investigators have carefully examined several possible explanations. The first is that Amy accidentally went overboard during the early morning hours before the ship reached Curacao. Supporters of this theory point to the narrow 30-minute window between the last time Ron Bradley saw his daughter on the balcony and the moment she disappeared. Cruise ships are surrounded by open ocean, and accidents at sea have happened before. But there are difficult questions. No witness reported seeing Amy fall. No one heard a scream. Despite search efforts, no body was ever recovered. Another theory suggests Amy left the ship alive and was abducted. Supporters of this idea point to the reported sightings in Curacao, the account from Canadian tourist David Carmichael, the statement made years later by former Navy Petty Officer William Hefner, and the anonymous photographs that surfaced online. Each report appears compelling when viewed on its own, but investigators have never been able to independently verify any of them. They remain possibilities, not proof. A third theory suggests Amy chose to disappear voluntarily. Her family has never believed that explanation. According to those closest to her, Amy loved her family. She had recently graduated from college. She had started building her career. She had plans for the future. Leaving without contacting the people she loved would have been completely out of character. And that is what makes this case so difficult. Every theory explains part of the story. None explains all of it. If Amy entered the water, where is the evidence? If she left the ship, how did no one stop her? If the reported sightings were genuine, why has none ever led investigators to her? Nearly 3 decades later, those same questions remain unanswered. For Ron, Eva, and Brad Bradley, time has never erased the uncertainty. They have spent years speaking publicly about Amy, following every credible lead, working with investigators, keeping her story alive. Because as long as the case remains open, hope remains alive too. Today, Amy would be in her 50s. She may have built a career. She may have raised a family. Or her story may have ended on that quiet morning aboard the Rhapsody of the Seas. No one knows. What began as a family vacation became one of the most haunting disappearances in modern history. A young woman was seen resting peacefully on a cruise ship balcony. 30 minutes later, she was gone. No confirmed suspect. No definitive evidence. No answers. Only questions that have echoed for more than a quarter of a century. Perhaps someone noticed something that seemed too ordinary to remember. Perhaps someone has carried a secret all these years. Or perhaps one overlooked detail still sits hidden in an old file, waiting to be connected to everything investigators already know. Until that day comes, Amy Lynn Bradley's story remains unfinished. And somewhere, the truth still exists. If you have any credible information about the disappearance of Amy Lynn Bradley, the FBI asks that you contact your nearest FBI office or the nearest U.S. embassy or consulate. One piece of information could make all the difference. If you found this documentary informative, don't forget to subscribe to Dark Case Files for more real investigations into the world's most compelling unsolved mysteries. What do you think happened to Amy Bradley? Do you believe she accidentally went overboard, or do you think she left the ship alive? Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments below. I read every comment, and I'd love to hear your perspective. If this documentary kept you engaged, please give it a like and share it with someone who enjoys true crime and unsolved mysteries. Every share helps bring more attention to cases that still need answers. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and remember, sometimes the smallest unanswered question leads to the biggest mystery